So good afternoon. I'm Rupert Calm-Seymour from R3N Consulting, and I've got the pleasure of talking with Richard Watson. Good afternoon, Richard. Richard's a futurist speaker, author, and scenario thinker, and founder of Now and Next. We last spoke on the 16th of June around, wow, the pandemic. Good afternoon, Richard. Where are we now?
Where are we now? Well, it turns out that the light at the end of the tunnel was the light at the beginning of another tunnel. If you look at the chronology I did, it's hard to say that actually, chronology, technically we should be at the great retreat with a sort of another great silence, but it doesn't feel like that. I mean, people are out and about. I mean, we are technically locked down to the same extent as last time, although certain shops have decided they're essential and they're open. I just don't think people are as scared as they were the first time around. They've decided that life has to go on, and they've become a bit more fatalistic about it, quite frankly.
Yeah, so I think if you think it back to June, we were sort of going into the pandemic, going into lockdown. We had all those thoughts and concerns, and now obviously we've now hit a second lockdown. You foresaw within the chronology all sorts of scenarios. So how have things now changed from then?
Well, I think essentially most people have decided that this government is inept, incompetent, hypocritical, create rules that nobody understands. I mean, there was a YouGov poll a little while ago, 61% of people do not trust the Prime Minister, and I would certainly support that thought. I think they're doing a truly shocking job. I mean, it's not entirely their fault. I think we have quite an individualist culture which won't be told what to do. But things like track and trace, which they had plenty of time to organize. I mean, I can't use it. It doesn't work on my phone. I heard somewhere they'd spent 10 billion on that, which is, I can't understand how you can spend 10 billion on something like that. And even then it doesn't work. They're constantly changing position. They're constantly fighting with each other. The level of ineptitude, I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it. And then there's a sort of the deeper question of, what are we actually fighting COVID-19 for? And the sort of parrot response to that is to save lives, to protect the NHS, to flatten the curve. Well, yes, we are saving lives, but I think that's not the only thing that matters, actually. I think, I read somewhere that the average age that people die from COVID is 82.4. So without being unkind, they're going to die soon anyway. And we're depriving them of their liberty. We're depriving these people of time with their loved ones, with family and friends. And the government seems to consider that, quantity of life is all that matters rather than quality. And actually, I think what we're fighting this for is to preserve some kind of sense of shared humanity, to preserve the way we live or the way we want to live, preserve our freedoms. I mean, it's a bit like in the Second World War, Churchill was criticized for not shutting down the theaters and cinemas and so on. And I don't remember exactly what the quote was or what his response was, but it was along the lines of, well, why are we fighting? What are we fighting this for then? We're trying to protect the way we live. And we're also, I think, sacrificing, we're so convinced we need to sort of save older people that we're sacrificing younger people that have their whole lives ahead of them. I mean, socially and economically, they are being sacrificed. And I think, that is a great disservice, quite frankly.
Yeah. I mean, I think when I first started sort of listening to you and talking to you about your thought pattern, I mean, I know we touched on many moons ago the sort of initial thoughts, which then moved on to the chronology, and within that piece there's a whole section about retreat and progression from that. Now that was June. We're now November. From those conversations that we've had, there was a number of sort of matrix scenarios that you talked about, and it's great to understand that the impact of where we're at. Consumer safety, people safety, security, confidence, convenience. We're all in this monotonous loop, it feels. But how are the sort of matrices and the scenarios you foresaw, how have they amended or changed?
I mean, it's too early to really say yet. I mean, we developed, I worked with a friend of mine, Oliver Freeman, over in Sydney, and we were looking at scenarios for a sort of post-COVID world. And we had a sort of 2x2 essentially. And one of the axes was profit versus principle as a sort of operating ethos for business, and that essentially captures the thought that health versus wealth, that the government has constantly been sort of caught between indecision on those two, and the other was a sort of chaos control axis. Although that was, we were thinking about the year 2040, and we were primarily looking at climate change and the human reaction to climate change, and whether that was going to be managed and controlled or totally chaotic. So it wasn't specifically looking at the consequences of the pandemic next year or the year after that. It was further out. Although I think this sort of dilemma between health and wealth is something that's very much going on, and they still haven't made their mind up about what's more important there. And it is. I have to say, it is a very difficult decision, and to some extent, it's a non-question. You can't make that decision. You have to protect both. But I am concerned that we seem to be so obsessed with protecting the lives of a very small number of people that we are totally destroying the economy and the physical and mental health of a great number of people, the livelihoods of a great number of people. Most businesses, I think, have survived one lockdown. I'm not sure they're going to survive a second one.
Yeah, no, I think the challenges that many people face across all sorts of different scenarios is unbelievably dramatic. And I think especially, sitting here in November now, it's getting dark outside. It's going to get colder. Sometimes it's hard to understand what are the key focus areas that government, whatever color they are, will look to impact on. Obviously Christmas is coming. We're hearing of vaccines, but the long-term impact is something. Do you think we're going to see that in the next
it looks like long COVID is definitely a thing. And I think the economic consequences are going to be like we've never seen. They're just going to be so enormous unless something very strange happens. And I think mental health is going to be a real problem. It already is. Never mind, it will be. And I'm not sure how sensitive to that the government really is. I suppose it's something that's hard to sort of grasp in some ways. But we seem to be insistent on this sort of top-down command and control sort of model, which is, do as we say, or we'll sort of fine you or lock you up. And I think people have got a bit fed up with that. I think it'd be much better to actually let individuals make their own decisions. I am better placed, I would argue, to decide what's best for my 88-year-old mum than the government, quite frankly. I know the local situation and so on. And we also seem to be just sort of in awe of a bunch of experts that are sort of totally focused on worst case scenarios.
But then you touch on command and control. I know we both live in Sussex, and I scoot into Lewis. I don't see. Obviously, people are wearing masks, and there's a lot of sort of physical acceptance. When you go shopping or wherever you go, but the general wandering around, people seem pretty free and easy.
That's what I said. I think it doesn't feel like the first lockdown. There's a lot more people out and about. There are more shops open. There are more people sort of pushing the envelope in terms of whether they should or shouldn't be open. Bookshops are open. I would argue they are essential, but most people probably wouldn't. There's sort of, people are less fearful, I guess, to some extent. The mask thing is kind of interesting. More people are wearing them, although there's still a lot of people refusing to wear them. I've been to Greece a couple of times this year, and 100% compliance. There's none of this invisible disability stuff. They just wear masks. End of story. Whereas I don't know what.
Why are there people in this country that just don't comply?
I think
is it a level of compliance?
We have and it's the same with the US. We have a highly individualistic culture. I'm contradicting myself to some extent here. We have a highly individualistic culture, and don't tell me what to do. I will, I don't want to wear a mask. And there is evidence that they're not massively effective, but I think they're better than nothing. I see it tends to be young people. There's a lot of women in their early mid-20s that don't seem to be wearing them, and I suspect it's to do with makeup. Actually, it's as simple as that. A lot of men in their 20s, I don't know what the hell their problem is with them. There are a few people that genuinely have a problem wearing them, but I think very few indeed. People might say, you've got asthma, you should be allowed not to wear a mask. I would say if you've got asthma, you should definitely wear a mask, because you are very vulnerable.
And then I will, when I share this through all the different channels, talk about this treasure map you produced. Difficult to see it visually, so to speak, or virtually. But do you want to just describe what what that concept was
yeah,
about?
well, I just thought we had this 2x2, which is quite sweet, and it's obviously aimed at people north of 50 because all the scenarios are named after Beatles songs. So you've got you know, Revolution, Money, That's What I Want, Long and Winding Road, Here Comes the Sun. And I just thought we could have a bit of more of a play with that and actually turn it into a bit of a treasure map. So if you take the sort of the axis, which is profit, principle, chaos, control, you can almost make that a sort of ship's compass. And you get different shorelines, and you're bringing out sort of key features of each scenario. So scenario 2, which is around profit and chaos, which is sort of capitalism gone mad. You know, the symbol there is a pirate ship, for example. The lower scenario, we have a sort of restrained red dragon, which is a bit of a dig towards China. Bottom right, which is around control and principle, we have somebody holding the scales of justice, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So is this going to be released as a Christmas family board game at number 10?
Well, no. It was just for sort of our own personal amusement more than anything else, to be perfectly honest. I just thought it'd be quite fun to do it.
Well, I will, as I say, I will share that.
Talking of board games, by the way, do you know there is a board game called Pandemic, which apparently is rather good? Yeah, came out a few years ago.
I've heard of lots of people talking one called Monotony, because it's just sort of, you know, we're in this sort of loop of lockdown. But anyway, that's great. Good. Now coming up with the title for this conversation, you talked about mounting an insurrection. Why?
I mean, again, I'm sort of, there's contradictory things here. On the one hand, this seems to be a lot looser lockdown than last time, or at least people aren't paying as much attention to it. And I think that's good. I think people should have the right to make their own decisions about what's safe or not. And if they feel vulnerable, well, then lock yourself away or something, or wear a mask or whatever. But on the other hand, I almost feel there should be sort of mass disobedience. I mean, I think we're being far too passive and far too faint-hearted, quite frankly. I mean, most people will not die from this. The vast majority of people are absolutely fine, unless you are really quite ill already, or you're pretty old, or just incredibly unlucky. And I'm not entirely sure why we're being so, I don't know, well, why we're being so passive, why there's not more of a rebellion about this. And things like,
but do you think there will be? I mean, do you think, you know, at what point does human behavior get to a point where, you know, compliance, let's say face mask compliance?
I mean, you've got students coming down for Christmas, so they're always, you know, if there's going to be a riot, it's generally the students at the beginning, at the front of that queue. But I just think we have a culture that's not like that. We're not like the French or the Americans or something. We'll just sort of, you know, buy one of those tea towels that says "keep calm and carry on," or write a letter to the Daily Telegraph.
Or do we accept or expect that furlough will just continue? That the government support to people who are unemployed, or people.
I think there are a substantial number of people out there that are pretty happy with the situation right now. They're getting paid to do nothing, and they're pretty chuffed about that. There's also, I mean, the fact that the trains are pretty empty now. It's partly very significantly, I guess, to do with COVID. But I think there's an awful lot of people also that don't like spending £5,000 or £6,000 a year to travel into London on a train where you can't even get a seat, and they don't want to do it anymore, quite frankly. And this has proved the perfect excuse. But no, I don't think there will be a rebellion. I don't think we have a culture that's like that. It would have happened by now, I suspect. Although, you know, weird things. If we sort of cancel Christmas, whatever that means, or, you know, the weather turns really nasty, possibly. But I don't think so. I think there'll just be sort of the odd sort of flash of insurrection. There's not going to be a sort of general revolutionary fervor. No,
I know. Challenging times. Well, Richard, always good to talk to you. Any last thoughts as we head in towards December, the Christmas silly season, if there is one?
Any festive thoughts? Well, it's going to be a weird Christmas, that's for sure. I think people should just do what they think is right for them, quite frankly, and, you know, don't be a dick, but just do what you feel is right.
Yeah. So just a good old cup of common sense.
Yeah, I think a large dose of common sense would go a long way.
Oh, well, Richard, thank you so much for your time. You know, as always, really, really good to talk and listen to you and explore some pretty interesting things. Just like to say thank you to Lisa Bull and Social Media Sussex, obviously, for sponsoring this event. And Richard, have a lovely evening, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks very much. Ciao.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.